Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Coast to Coast Combat Hour. I'm your host, Matthew Hawkins, along with my co-host, Ed Carbajal, and on a weekly basis, we plan to bring you the biggest news and interviews in the world of combat sports. Ed, how you doing, my man?
Good, man. I'm just here, relaxing. Obviously, we are going to have a guest for the podcast, but she had to postpone till tomorrow morning. So we're going live now with our portion. Phoenix Carnivale's going to come in and school us on karate combat, the new full contact karate promotion that they're featuring their event tomorrow. It's a free live stream at karate.com and also on Fight TV. If you don't have the app, just go over to the blogboardjungle.com and you can get the link to download the app there. And also, I actually already embedded the stream, so if you don't even feel like doing it, you can just watch it there. But yeah, tomorrow morning I'll speak with Miss Carnival, and so apologies to those that we had said it to, but it was kind of a short notice thing, and she's just had to postpone till the morning. But yeah.
And the Karate Combat event, is that tomorrow night or is that Thursday night, the 26th?
It's Thursday night, the 26th at 9:30 p.m. my time, Eastern Standard Time. And you know what's funny, man? I was just thinking, just off on a tangent, because uh, the whole premise of this show is you're West Coast and I'm East Coast, and I always had that feeling that our time difference would mess up scheduling stuff, and it just seems like the guests we get on the West Coast are just easier to schedule because of the 3 hour you're 3 hours behind me. So I have a feeling this won't be the first or the last time it happens, but it happens, man. It happens. The clock keeps moving. Time waits for no
Yeah,
one.
well, we're getting people that are busy doing a lot of things in the world
Yeah,
of martial arts.
and she's a busy lady. Yeah,
Yeah, between her own podcast and, like you said, her seminars and Karate Combat, working with Access TV. She'll have a lot to say tomorrow, so I look forward to hearing your interview with her once that gets posted.
cool. Thanks, man. You know what? Real quick before we get into the other stuff we were going to talk about anyway, with the UFC in Atlantic City and the stuff going on this weekend. If anybody hasn't gone over to the blogboardjungle.com and read Matt's recent post, I know it's on the MMA community forum, but that thing you wrote about Cyborg versus Carano, that had me thinking when I read it. Actually, I put it in one of the posts when I reposted it for people to read. Cyborg has had to, like, it's like she's constantly having to prove herself. I mean, look how
Yeah, I
long
mean,
ago that was, and she's still, to this day, she's still fighting to show people, like, I'm legit, man. Like, it's almost, it kind of bothered me just reading it.
well, I mean, at that time, Gina was a superstar,
Yeah.
and that's I like to write that. I've been thinking about ways to write about women's MMA, and I started getting into it and realized that if I talked about everything I had seen, it was going to end up being a 40,000 word book basically. So I had to go to the start when I was going to no holds barred fights and witnessed some pretty wild stuff on the Indian reservations. But the very first fight that in women's MMA that really caught my attention, and I mean I say in the article about how I got on a plane to go watch it, was that fight. Gina Carano was an absolute superstar, and the hardcore fans that were watching the fights had got a new Cyborg from some of the undercards on the Elite XC, and she had made her name on a couple of the bigger fights, but she was always in Gina's shadow. And getting there and just seeing how big of a superstar Gina was, and I went into the fight rooting for Gina. The arena was, everybody was,
Yeah.
but you knew Cyborg was a killer, and you knew it was going to be a battle. So yeah, I highly recommend everybody who gets a chance look at that, read it. It's just one of those retrospective articles that I decided to write about one of the historical fights that I got to witness live.
Yeah, I mean, that's that series that you do, the View from the Hawk's Nest, that you've been kind enough to actually post on the blogboardjungle.com. So I really appreciate that. But I actually remember. I mean, it's funny that you remember flying over to see it, because I actually remember I watched it with my old roommate. He wasn't my roommate at the time, but and he's a casual fan, and even he remembers that fight. Like, everybody, it was such a monumental point in the sport. Then it kind of like dissipated, and everyone talks about Ronda Rousey and what she did, but it's really, that's the fight that kind of put it out there. And I think when you mentioned it, I mean, the way you closed your piece, that was a really good point to make, because a lot of people like, they're just now finding out about Chris Cyborg, and it's like, no, this is not her first rodeo, man. She's been there already before. Now she's got to fight to do it again to prove herself as the best female fighter on the planet, pretty much.
Well, you see Cyborg these days, and everybody just is so intimidated by her. Holly Holm had a nice strategy and was able to kind of hang in there, but she never really went after Chris. And you look back at that fight, and whether it was just a more of a Wild West type of the time in the sport or what, but Gina really went at her, got in her face, and I mean, just made it a great fight. When I think of great 1 round fights in the history of MMA, I think of that fight and the Paul Daly Nick Diaz for fights that ended with 1 or 2 seconds left in the first round, and
Mm.
it was just nonstop action from the start to finish. The arena was electric. And it was just a huge fight. If Gina had won, it probably would have got us to the right Ronda Rousey kind of era quicker. But Cyborg was without a doubt the baddest woman on the planet after that fight, and um, and she's proven it over the last. I mean, that was 2009, so we're 9 years later, and still hasn't lost. And other than a round or two to Holly Holm, hasn't. I don't think it lost a round other than that.
Yeah, no, definitely, man. That's definitely a memorable one. That was a great read. Thanks again for sharing it. But all right, but like now we got to get up to recent history. This past weekend in my home state, Atlantic City. I wish I was there for it. I don't know. I mean, I told you I got poison ivy, so I was kind of like in the house all weekend. But that was, I mean, that was a bunch of crazy fights, man.
Yeah, I was out, so I didn't get the chance to actually study them as much as I liked, but I definitely watched them in the background. Um, when I was glancing through stuff, the one that really caught my eye was the David Branch fight, him against Thiago Santos. Uh, I went into the fight thinking Branch would outskill him, but Santos on a 4 fight win streak was just mowing people down, and I didn't see David Branch knocking him out in the first round. That was a big surprise and a massive win for Branch and him moving
Yeah,
up in the rankings.
yeah. You know what? I wasn't really surprised though, only because like when you think about it, and I don't know if I wrote about it or I just thought about it, but it's like he was ready. He's been ready to go since the UFC was in Orlando back in what was that, February. And
Mm.
that was when he was originally scheduled, and they pushed him back to that fight. And that was supposed to be his comeback fight after his loss to Rockhold. So I could tell, and just from following him on social media, and when he was upset about the fight being pushed back, I could tell that he had a lot of I guess angst. He was ready to go. So, and I think we saw it obviously in that fight that he was just like he wanted to get back in the win column, and he did so in a really good, obviously in a stunning fashion to a lot of folks. But I saw him win in that fight. I wasn't surprised at all. And I was happy for him too, because he's a former two division champion himself, and I feel like he's a lot of times he kind of gets brushed under the rug by the promotion. Like I don't think he gets enough. You know, they don't recognize him enough for what he's already done in the sport.
Well, in his first stint in the UFC, he had some fights that weren't too memorable. I don't remember his exact record. I think he was like 2-2, but none of them were really stunning wins. I think, if I recall, I believe Gerald Harris um, knocked him out with a slam. Was probably one of the bigger highlights, which is not obviously not good for him. But then like you said, he went on to World Series of Fighting and had a huge run where he won the middleweight and light heavyweight titles. That's the thing with him. I mean, having won and defended the light heavyweight title in World Series of Fighting, if he's able to transfer that down to the middleweight division in the UFC, and now he's developed a knockout punch, that puts him in a whole nother another threat to all the other contenders in that division.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I just hope I didn't look at the injury report that deeply. I know it's been published already, but because he had talked about his leg, he said his leg was busted up, but I hope it wasn't actually busted up. But I'd have to look because I know that they released a list of suspensions this morning or Monday morning. I forget when. But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely looking forward to his comeback fight. The fighter you just mentioned, actually, the one that you said knocked him out by slam, is that the guy that they picked as an alternate for the Bellator? You just
Yeah, I recall that that's who knocked him out. I hope I'm not confusing him with somebody, but yeah, Gerald Harris. who also just got announced today is stepping in for John Salter um, in Bellator against who is it?
Rafael Lovato.
There it is, Lovato Jr. So he's stepping in on what are we 4 days notice now?
Yeah,
Before that huge fight, so he's another guy who's been around a while, fought in World Series of Fighting, been very competitive. So glad to see him get another chance against a undefeated opponent. Should be not a bad fill-in. Salter going down is obviously not good because I think with a win he was probably looking at a title shot, but um, good solid veteran coming in for a last minute replacement is
and
not a bad job.
yeah, no, definitely not. But the other fight from the Atlantic City event that Davashvili and Ricky Simon, wasn't that the card that Corey Turner was on that Ricky Simon
Yeah,
fought
Simon
at?
won the main event that night, and he signed a UFC contract right after it.
Wow. So I mean, that's I mean, he obviously he won, but everyone keeps talking about the stoppage and the confusion with it. But I didn't. I honestly thought he was losing the first round of that fight, and then the second round he kind of turned it around because Merab Devashvili, the guy out of Sarah's camp, is. I mean, he's a tough. That's the one tough customer. Obviously, he didn't tap, but that was definitely an odd submission, odd way to go out, and kind of creepy.
Yeah, I'm not sure about. I know the referees, John McCarthy, Mark Goddard, a bunch of the well-respected refs are saying that he was out. I got to watch it again. They keep. I don't know if the referee waved it off at the bell, then that would be one thing. But I'm a little confused on to whether they went to the replay to see if he was out or if it was just kind of a huddle up on the cage side. I mean, it was close. I thought he might have been out for about a half second, but seeing that he was ahead on two of the three judges' scorecards, that's a tough loss to take
Yeah,
when you hold out for that last minute. I know it looked like he KO'd himself when he kind of got DDT'd into the mat on the when he got put into the guillotine choke.
yeah.
I thought the referee missed that one. That probably should have been the end of the fight, but definitely a bizarre situation with the way he was kicking his legs and. Um,
Yeah, that was the thing. I mean, this is something that obviously we just had Ray on last week. It'd be nice to hear his take on it. Maybe maybe he'd comment in the community forum. But the one thing that I noticed as I was watching it, because I actually yelled out, "He's out" at one point because when he was kicking his legs and Simon had the guillotine on, his right hand was free and there was space between their chests where I'm like, okay, you can at least try to get your hand in there to hand fight, and he didn't do that. That's what made me think he was out already. I think that the body was just doing what the body does, because weird things can happen when you go. I mean, I've been put out a few times myself, and I don't remember. I mean, I've heard of stories of what I did or what people saw, because usually when you're out, someone's waking you up, and you're like, oh, what happened? So I'm kind of leaning towards that he was also out too with everybody else.
yeah, I mean, if he was, it was a matter of one set. I mean, all that really matters is if he was out when the bell sounded and the hold was released,
Mm,
because the referee didn't call anything prior to that. So when he releases the hold, he looks kind of spaced out for about a half a second. His eyes are open, which doesn't mean anything. He could be unconscious with his eyes open.
yeah.
But Simon stands up and points to the referee that he's out, and instantly he responds saying, "No, he's not." Kind of gets up. It's definitely a close call. If it was a situation like we saw years ago with Jeremy Horn and Chuck Liddell, where Liddell was out unconscious, or we saw it a couple years ago in the uh, Evan Smith Pennington fight, uh, where Smith was choked unconscious. Those weren't at the end of the fights; they were at the end of the round. But we don't want unconscious fighters winning fights. I think that would be a bad precedent to set.
Yeah.
But even if they're on the cards, if once the fight ends, if they're released, they can't be asleep on the mat and then get their hand raised. We saw that happen in an Invicta fight in Missouri about a year ago, or it was actually uh, January of I think 2015. There was a fight. I can't recall the fighters' names, but one
Was
of them
my
was choked.
was Mike England the ref?
He might have been. No, but one of the fighters was choked unconscious after the second round, and she woke up a few seconds after the bell, laying on the ground, and then the ref let her continue, and she ended up winning the decision
Hmm.
after surviving the third round. So
Oh,
it
I
was just
remember that. Yeah, I can't remember who it was, but that was who was that? It was the one of the girls was like Josh Barnett's students, right?
I can't remember.
Yeah.
I remember watching the fight in a hotel room. I was at the BJ Penn Rodriguez fight in Phoenix that weekend. But I know Megan Anderson was the main event that night. That's when she won the title that Cyborg had vacated. That's how I remember the card. But yeah, it's just one of those things. We don't want to have unconscious people winning fights. Um, but if he was out, the ref made the right call. But if he was just kind of you know space traveling there for a minute or for a half second, that's a tough way to lose a fight if two of the three judges had you winning it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was still they definitely got their bonus though for fight of the night or yeah, fight of the night. Well deserved too cuz I mean, the place I was watching it at uh was definitely paying more attention to that than whatever baseball or whatever the hell was on TV. Um but uh that was also the Frankie Edgar and Cub Swanson both had their kind of return fights after both losing to Brian Ortega. So it was kind of like that's kind of how they marketed it. Um, I don't know. What did you think of the return of these guys? I mean, Cub Swanson, they were skeptical that he wasn't going to come back to the UFC because he was exploring free agency for a little while there. But obviously, they both decided to run it back against each other.
Well, I think it was probably one of the reasons why Cub came back to the UFC, and if he probably got offered the fight to get a rematch against somebody that had given him a pretty bad loss in the past. Edgar fought smart, didn't uh, didn't go for the kill or anything like that, but kind of played the Frankie Edgar style of fighting, and got a win that he had to have. If he would have taken a loss there, two losses in 8 weeks or whatever it is, would have been pretty much an end to his 145-pound career, I would say. Um, Swanson is what he is. He's a tough fighter, a threat to anybody, but I think he's kind of going to be the person that everybody's going to have to go through to get into the top five in that division. And it's not bad though if he hangs around, beats some people. Um, as you saw with Iakenta a few weeks ago, if you're ranked in the top 10 and you're beating some people, you're open to a possible crazy title shot. We saw it with Michael Bisping. We've seen it with a bunch of guys in the past.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was just obviously this whole state was happy that Frankie Edgar won because if for MMA, he's obviously like the flagship fighter for New Jersey. It's too bad Jim Miller didn't have the same luck that night, but I felt bad watching him take that knee. But he, he's he's just that's a tough dude. All those South Jersey guys are pretty tough.
Yeah, Jim Miller's been around a long, long time, and
Yeah.
I think he tied the record for most fights in the octagon. Um, but that's four losses in a row. Um, with a brutal knockout on this one. It's just one of those things. He's beaten a ton of great fighters, and I don't think he's necessarily ready to hang them up, but I don't know if he should necessarily waste his time on the undercards of UFCs right now. There's other organizations out there that he could go main event. I don't know if he has the want to go to Japan or something, but throwing him in a lightweight tournament in Ryzen or something like that would be pretty cool, and I think he would help be really dangerous in something like that with his wrestling.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, and I feel like he's mentioned exploring other places to fight too. Like maybe a year ago, I think the interview was on Flow Combat. When he talked to Dwayne Finley. I can't remember exactly if where he said he was interested in, but I'm pretty sure. I know he definitely mentioned it. But um, the main event, obviously, Kevin Lee is back in the win column. But let me ask you something. A lot of people are commenting on. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. People are kind of like knocking Kevin Lee's win because he didn't make weight, but it's like, and he called out Khabib, and Khabib's the champ, and he hasn't made weight in the past. I'm like, I kind of don't care what weight they fight at. I would just like to see him fight. I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be a great fight. I don't. It's not the fight that I want to see right now. Um, I'd like to see Khabib, fight Connor's the fight to make, but in a perfect world, I would hope the UFC wouldn't reward him with a title shot after all the bullshit that went down in Brooklyn a couple weeks ago.
Yeah,
Um, I know Khabib's aiming for November, I think, in Madison Square Garden in New York. So if it's not Connor, which, like I said, I kind of would prefer that they kind of put their foot down a little bit. I'd like to see Eddie Alvarez. I would like to see him get. He's right there. He's he's the previous champ before Connor at that weight class. He had an embarrassing loss to Connor at MSG in 2015, and his style wise, he poses some problems for Khabib, and him being a Northeast the underground king out there. I just think it would be cool to see if he could kind of redeem himself in MSG and take down the unbeatable Khabib. I think that'd be a cool storyline that they could use to sell the fight. And I mean, that's kind of the fight. I'm a huge Alvarez fan, so maybe I'm a little biased, but that's kind of the one I'd like to see. Kevin Lee would be nice, but Khabib's catching a lot of heat for fighting, the 11th ranked fighter in the last minute to get the title.
yeah,
And I he fights the 5th ranked guy and wins, then all of his haters are just going to be saying that he fought the 5th ranked guy and didn't fight the other 4. So I'd prefer Alvarez if it's not Connor. Poirier is right there too. I'd probably take Lee ahead of Dustin just because I think it's a tougher matchup for Khabib, and it'd be a really, really good fight. But it's hard to reward a guy with a title shot who doesn't make weight immediately. After
yeah.
that
I
fight.
mean, but like again, the guy that has the titles is someone that doesn't make weight either, and that's one thing. I know you mentioned Connor getting this shot, but I'm kind of like, and I wrote about it over at My MMA News. Like all these guys that are active and competing and fighting and chasing their own view of what they believe the rankings are or should be are putting in the work and they're correcting, including featherweight, the 2 titles that Connor still says he claims. They're correcting themselves with the competition amongst them. I mean, with the fights like we just talked about, Swanson and Frankie Edgar and Brian Ortega is going to fight Max Holloway, and he was ready to go to 55 to fight in Brooklyn, and then all those everything that happened with Kevin Lee this month. I feel like April without Connor, the only thing Connor fought was that bus. I feel like the divisions, these guys are settling it amongst themselves, and I honestly, I don't care if he gets the title shot. Like I kind of want to see, like I said, I kind of want to see. I'm liking Kevin Lee and Khabib right now myself.
Well, you say Khabib hasn't made weight. In the past, that was an issue for him. 2 or 3 fights ago, he's made it his last 2. He's the champ, so he's there no matter what.
Yeah.
The issue with Kevin Lee is that he missed weight this time. His last fight, it took a second weigh-in for him to make weight, which isn't always a big deal, but it's not a great sign either. If you make that fight for Madison Square Garden in November and you make that the fight of the year,
Mm.
you can't really. If he doesn't make weight and that fight gets canceled and you end up with Khabib versus Takanori Gomi, then
Yeah, yeah,
you can't really complain. That's my thing. Like, I'm not a big fan of the weight classes. I'm not a big fan of the weight cuts. I'd prefer to sign a fight and just say we agree we're going to show up within 10 pounds of the weight and go from there. But you know, I wouldn't reward a guy who missed weight. I know
you
he
know,
only missed it by a pound, but too many guys are professional, make weight every time,
yeah.
and I'd reward those guys, especially if they're ranked ahead of him in the rankings right now.
It's funny though. What you just said is it's super like deja vu because I was actually talking about it with Nolan King back in, was it in February when we were at Mohegan Sun covering the Bellator event with Mitrione and Roy Nelson. After the fight, we were looking ahead at Brooklyn, and one of the things that we talked about was uh we were like, okay, but like because at the time it was Ferguson and Khabib, which fell apart, what, 5 times already or whatever the number is, and
It's 4 or 5, yeah.
yeah. So now what you just said, it's like, do you book do you book a fight in a venue that's risky like that? I mean, you're probably right. They probably wouldn't think about booking anything risky for November at Madison Square Garden, especially with what happened at 223. Because even though 223 wasn't a bad event, it wasn't like 208, but it was obviously the stuff leading up to it is probably making them, rethink their where they go in New York.
Well, the commission there is obviously strict. Every event they've had there has had issues, whether it was a fight night or the first one we lost Cerrone and Gastelum um, uh, the day of the weigh-in. And then I think they had issues with, I don't remember exactly the whole issues. I know that was the one that got canceled, and um, they weren't too keen on. I think Jim Miller had offered to step up. Some guys like that because Thiago Alves had missed weight by like 7 pounds or something. Also, that event, but I just there's guys ranked higher than him. If Kevin Lee was ranked 1 or 2, and it was 1 pound, and he was the for sure number one contender, I'd say give him the shot. Him being ranked 5 right now with worthy people in front of him. Even Connor aside, throw Connor out that mix. You still got Alvarez, Poirier, and well, those two for sure. And then who am I missing? I feel like I'm missing. Oh, and Alvarez. Or did I say Alvarez? Regardless, maybe I'm thinking Connor. It's, with the UFC, they're champions, not ranked. So the number one guy is actually the number one contender. He's not the champion. So, but that would be my thing. Alvarez would be the fight for me to make based off location and his history, his fight resume, and a chance at redemption in MSG. I think would be a cool story. Now,
Yeah.
I don't think he beat Khabib, but that's the fight that I would want to watch.
No, yeah, and the other thing is too, it's April now, and you're looking at like that's the end of the year pretty much, November, December. So, a lot can happen between now and then.
Yeah, Ferguson was the other name I was trying to think of, but obviously he's out with the knee injury. So, I mean, if he's able to come back by November, I don't care how many times that fight's been canceled. That's the fight I book, and I take my chance. And you got to book the best fight that's available. Ferguson hasn't done anything other than be injured to lose that shot. So
yeah, it's kind of messed up how that happened.
The interim title I could care less about. They take that away. That's irrelevant. If he's not going to defend the interim title anyway.
Yeah.
He can say he has it, but he's not going to defend it. If he comes back healthy, he's going to fight Khabib, or at least he should. I shouldn't say he's going to, because anything, and most things seem to happen in the UFC that don't make sense recently. But
yeah.
But with all that said, we're what about 96 hours away from the Fedor versus Frank Mir clash at Bellator.
Yeah, talking about bias. Talking about bias.
Hey, like I said, I know the nerves are starting to get in. I'm getting the sweater dry cleaned and ready to go. The bobblehead army is in full force.
For folks that don't know, Matt's got he's got an exact replica of the Fedor. What's this? A sweater of ultimate victory? Is that
actually? Here's my fresh new clean one for for Saturday night.
Nice.
But yeah. I'm just getting excited for it. I've been watching
how you have sweaters and you're in California. I'm the one that needs to have that sweater. But go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
We watching the countdown shows. I know I've seen them on some of your Twitter posts, and I think Bellator's done a great job. If people haven't seen, they want to Google search the Bellator countdown. I know they've done round 1 and round 2, and it's a really cool look into the fight camps of both fighters. I mean, two legends. Who have both been monumental, in the sport of MMA. And, this is kind of the fight that I wished was the final. When the brackets came out, I don't want to say it, I don't know if it was because maybe in my back of my mind, I thought it was a bad matchup for Fedor just based off Mir's size and his grappling ability. But it's kind of the fight that I was hope would be the final. You obviously can never plan for that in a tournament. So far, so good on at least guys in the first 2 fights not getting injured. But their next fight's still a few months off, so anything could happen after this. So I don't know. I think it's going to be fun. I know the nerves for me will be going, and
You think
probably
it's
be
gonna be
drinking.
short? Yeah, I feel like it's not gonna go all 3 rounds.
Uh, no, I mean based off what I've based more off Fedor. Well, I shouldn't say that. Mir's been kind of a knockout artist his last few fights too. Um, I might be sandwiching some around the snooze fest with Arlovsky and stuff like that, but um, other than
Well,
that, I mean, I if you put me on I'm going to say Fedor wins by knockout, early second round. Maybe he has to get through and survive on the ground to end the round one, but
I mean, we did have Frank Mir, striking coach, as a guest not 2 episodes ago, and obviously, so he's been working on his hands too. I mean, everybody knows Samir's a submission. They get the Belter put out that scary video with Frank Mir telling people how he's broken more bones and how he doesn't want people to tap and how he'll pay them not to tap. I mean, that right there. I mean, I know Fedor's stone cold, but that was an intimidating promo right there.
yeah, well, Mir's a bad man, but he he had his fight with Nogueira where he was getting beat, and then Nogueira went in for a choke as opposed to going for the TKO, and it cost him dearly.
Yeah,
Um, you know, uh, Mir's a different than he was early in his career, and he was coming off of a motorcycle injury when Pedro Pano, that was I think at UFC. Gosh, I want to say 57. I think I was at that one, and Pedro Pano just, I mean, put it on him as a jiu-jitsu guy and brutally TKO'd him. He had his issues with Ian Freeman. I think it was UFC 38 um, in London. Those are old fights now and
yeah.
in the past, but there has been a time in Mir's career where when he when he dealt with some adversity, he didn't exactly rise to the occasion. He's more of a veteran fighter now and knows how to I think to work his way out of those things. But I think if Fedor can hurt him, I think we can. I think we might see a Mir that looks like somebody who hasn't fought in a couple years and is getting up there in age. And he's 18-11. He's fought the best there is, but he's still got 11 losses. It's weird to look at their records. I know Fedor fought some guys in Japan over the years that weren't top notch, but he has twice as many wins, exactly twice as many wins, and almost half and less than half the amount of losses that Frank Mir has. So
Mhm.
it's kind of one of those things. But like I said, he fought guys. I don't know what the most amount of fights Mir had in a year, but Fedor a couple years had like 7 fights a year
Yeah, wow, that's a lot.
when he was adding those up. So I mean, it's two legends. I'm gonna pick Fedor by second round knockout. Um, hopefully Brett Rogers style, but we will have to wait and see.
Wow, man, you really okay? I mean, I try to be as objective as possible. Like, I really think anything can happen, but I'm obviously leaning a little more towards Mir, just because I'm looking at. I mean, like I think when I think about their more recent fights, like I just think about. I know Mir got knocked out by Mark Hunt, but I mean, it's a Mark Hunt punch, and then but then I look at when Mitrione and Fedor went at it here in New York last summer, and you were there for that. We were both there for that, actually. Um, that was one that was just like so. When I look at the moments of that fight, they knocked each other down. So they obviously he's got the ability to still drop people, but it was the recovery that's where I saw the concern for Fedor. So if he gets dropped against Mir Saturday, I don't see him scrambling to recover as fast just because of the time it took him to do it against Mitrione.
No, that's fair. I mean, and obviously I've stated my bias. I, I don't know. It's two fighters at the end of their career. Neither of them have been extremely impressive. Um, but I'm gonna pick Fedor by. I don't know what the odds are. I think it's Mir's a slight favorite at this point. Um, I don't know how much of that has to do with the American betting audience. Obviously, the stuff like that. Mir's more well known probably to the American MMA fans. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things. It's I'm just hoping for a great fight. Um, I've stated it before. I just don't want to see any kind of catastrophic injury. I'd hate to see somebody blow their knee out. I'd hate to see somebody hurt their back or their neck or, some stuff we've seen historically where older fighters get into the cage. I just rather not see that, but
Yeah.
I hope it gets good ratings. I hope this leads to the Bader Mo fight being the final quarterfinal and just setting up a great semifinal. And I don't know what Bellator has planned. Nothing's been announced for the next round of the tournament, so I don't know if
I
they're coming.
I don't know where. I mean, I asked about New York, and they didn't have an answer for me when I asked. But I'll tell you one thing, and this is me going into my tinfoil hat mode. If you watch those promotional videos for this weekend's event, Frank Mir's wearing a hoodie that says New York on it, and I've never seen that hoodie before. It's a Bellator hoodie with New York, so that leads me to believe that they're already making stuff. They're probably coming back soon, I want to say, but that's just me being like I said, I sometimes I overthink things, and I notice stuff that makes me think conspiracy. But
Well, I don't know what if Fedor wins. If I'm Bellator, I think that's a perfect fight to either do in Russia with Sonnen or in Japan. I think Sonnen would go over huge in Japan for one. I think his promotions and just the legacy of Fedor in that country fighting, and then I think he could also be the quote unquote American gangster going into Russia. I think that would be another one that would. I mean, that would be a sure sellout. I don't know what the American ratings would be because of the time change and everything like that, but if you wanted to put on a big event in one of those countries, I think you could probably pull it off with those two guys. If Mir wins, that puts Mir and Sonnen. You know, I don't know. That seems more like of a West Coast kind of fight. Um,
yeah,
but I don't know. I think it's gonna be great. That'll
what
be what's that? April 28th. This Saturday night on the Paramount Network and the Bellator app. So
what do you think about folks that like? Because like the one thing that and it bothers me, even Angelo Reyes said it when he was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. Like people kind of like knocking the fact that these guys are such veterans and they've been around so long. Like I always kind of get a little bothered. I'm like, come on. I mean, what wouldn't you want to, if you were a fighter and you wanted to fight, wouldn't you want to still be fighting? Like, why are you going to try to poke fun at them and make fun of, oh, the old guys are fighting, like, you want to, you're still going to watch this fight. Number one, if you're even aware of it, you're going to watch it. And I mean, they're legends too. I mean, you don't see people, I mean, doing that in any other sport. That's one thing Angelo said that I was kind of like, yeah, man. Some MMA fans can be rough sometimes.
well, yeah, I mean they can. MMA being a new sport doesn't have the history. You still don't have a lot of people that were, especially our age, weren't raised on MMA. Um, all I can really compare it to, I guess, in my lifetime would be kind of when George Foreman came back. Um, I think he fought a guy. I want to say he fought Jerry Cooney, and they called it Geezers at Caesars, and that's actually how it was promoted. And
Yeah,
and it wasn't until I think Foreman knocked out Michael Moore to win the title, and it was unexpected. It
yeah,
wasn't like it was kind of a circus show. And then Foreman won that fight, and all of a sudden he became kind of an American hero again, and his whole brand blew up again for a whole nother generation. That's kind of what I'm hoping happens with this fight and this tournament. You know, Ryan Bader, Matt Mitrione, you know, winning it doesn't really do anything for the new generation. They're aware of these guys, but I think if somebody like even Sonnen, I don't see him winning it, but hypothetically, if him or Mir or Fedor win this, it kind of is kind of brings the new generation of fans kind of a old school. Hopefully it gets people to go to YouTube and look at all their old fights, or go
yeah.
to Fight Pass and look at all their old fights, or just go to Wikipedia and read about them, or look up some old Sherdog play-by-play, or stuff like that to get to know these guys, because that's what the other sports had. I grew up watching baseball, a huge baseball fan, but I never watched Willie Mays play, and I know his career ended pretty ugly, I think, for the Mets after playing for the Giants for years. But Willie Mays is the greatest baseball player of all time in most people's estimate. Nobody takes anything away from him based off of his last 3 or 4 seasons where he hit like a buck 50 and hit like 6 home runs. MMA is the only one where the greatest of all time changes every week. That's one of the weird things about the MMA world that I'm not sure about. Even Michael Jordan finished fairly well with the Wizards, but he was not. Nobody would consider the last couple years of Jordan's career him being the greatest of all time. If he was an MMA fighter, he would be, he'd be the guy right now who's 3-3 in his last 6 fights, and had some real highlights, but had a brutal knockout loss, and people would be talking about how he's washed up and he's not the greatest of all time anymore. Wayne Gretzky in hockey, all these guys, their career comes to an end because it gets ugly at the end. I mean, very very few guys. I don't. Jerry Rice, his numbers went down, and he's pretty much considered the greatest football player of all time. He was playing for the Raiders. I think he had about 30 catches his last season in the NFL. You know, MMA is the only fight where you can win 30 fights in a row, you get knocked out, and you go from being the greatest of all time for 10 years in a row to somebody who shouldn't even be ranked in the top 100 of all time. And that's an exaggeration, but it's one of those things where the MMA fans are brutal when it comes to recognizing greatness and realizing that guys get old and their careers come to an end. It's not something that you maintain. If you could maintain it, I mean, if Fedor was still undefeated and was 43-0 right now, um, it would be unheard of.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen in any sport. But for some reason, in MMA, we kind of downgrade our legends. Sakuraba is another example. Anybody that watched Sakuraba compete for 10, 12, 15 years of his career knew that he was without a doubt one of the top, 20 fighters in the history of the sport. Win-loss record aside, the guy was an absolute killer who fought everybody. And but he ends his career, in some brutal fashion, losing to Melvin Manhoff, Jason Miller, guys that were just way more in their prime than him while
Yeah.
he was pushing the limit. And they take a beating when it comes to the historical look of a lot of our fans. But getting back to the fight, I just hope it's a great fight. I'm excited. I guess I probably want Fedor to win more, basically because it means there's another Fedor fight down the line. And
Yeah.
for
Something
me,
tells me there'll be another Fedor fight anyway. I mean, even I doubt if he loses, he's going to retire. I mean, the coolest thing he did recently was after the loss at Madison Square Garden. One of the questions somebody asked me, I forget who asked him. They were like, they just asked him, and from Proof Media, we still have the video up there. We're at the post fight presser when they were just like, "Why are you still fighting?" And he just said, "Because I'm a fighter." And everybody like stood up and clapped for him because they were like, "Yeah, man, like, yeah, can't really argue with that."
no, no, I think once he had his loss, I think some of the pressure was off there, and he kind of realized that it's about making money, it's about fighting, doing what he loves. And if that's the case, then all power to him. And you know, I think that goes for him and Mir. I hope this isn't the final fight for either one of the guys, but that's just being a spoiled fight fan. You want them to hang around longer than they probably should, but
Yeah, that's true too.
you don't want to get greedy. But that's what I'm hoping. It's just a good performance, so everybody can go, hey, I want to watch both these guys fight again.
Yeah,
4 or 5 months down the line.
yeah, definitely. All right. Well, I mean, we're keeping it short because we're gonna add the audio when I speak with Phoenix Carnival tomorrow, because of the rescheduled interview. And that'll be added to the audio portion of this podcast, which is available on iTunes and Anchor FM and Pocket Casts and Overcast, Coast to Coast Combat Hour. So if you guys are in any of those services, please subscribe. And then what else do we got to plug, Matt? I keep forgetting.
Twitter at Combat Hour. Uh, Twitter at MMA Hawk 21, actually on Twitter and Instagram. And you are at Carbazol on Twitter. The MMAcommunity.com, best forum on the internet for MMA talk. And I think that's about it, man. Look forward to hearing you and Phoenix talk tomorrow, and tell our next show next week.
All right, cool, man. Thanks for listening, everybody. Peace.